Hey Gerald, it's time to learn to purl today. We learned the knit stitch a few days ago, and now we're ready to move on and learn the purl stitch. Once we've mastered this, you pretty much know everything that there is to know. We just fancy it up a little bit from here forward. So what I've done is I've knit a few stitches to show you the difference between what the knit stitch and the purl stitch will look like. So I have knit the first 4 stitches on my row here. And if I pull them down a little bit, you can see that the front part of that stitch is flat. Now over here, this is the back side of my piece. So this is what the back of the knit stitch looks like from the row before. And if I pull that down, you can see that that row of bumps doesn't disappear. Now what we do with the purl stitch is effectively recreate that bump that happens on this side of the fabric. So when we knit, the yarn is at the back of our needle. When we purl, we have to bring the yarn around to the front of the needle. So I'm going to tension my yarn. I'm going to bring it to the front of the right needle, and now I'm ready to purl the next stitch. If the yarn is in the back, I'm ready to knit. If the yarn is in the front, I'm ready to purl. So I'm going to show you in slow motion how to do the purl stitch, and then just like with the knit stitch, I'm going to give you a rhyme to help you remember how to do it. You take your right needle tip, and instead of coming to the left of the leg of the stitch, that's what this is called. That's called the leg of the stitch. One leg of that stitch. Instead of taking my needle tip to the left, I'm going to keep my needle tip to the right. And I'm going to come in underneath from the right to the left of that leg of the stitch. And as you can see, my working yarn is still at the front. I'm going to wrap the working yarn, I'm going to take it in between the 2 needle tips, first of all, and then I'm going to wrap it around the right-hand needle tip that is sitting on the top of how those 2 needle tips are sitting. And then I'm going to gently pull it through, and I'm going to take that needle tip with that yarn loop out through that leg of the stitch, and then it's going to come off the needle tip. And now you can see I have 4 knit stitches and 1 purl stitch. So you can see how they look different. The back of a knit stitch looks like a purl bump. So let's do another one. The rhyme that goes with the purl stitch has to do with sheep. Now, because it's wool that we're knitting, having it be about sheep is probably appropriate. So we take our right needle tip and we go in under the fence, grab the sheep out of the fence, and off we leap. In under the fence, grab that sheep out of the fence. Can you see? Can you see how the needle tips never stop touching each other? So that's how you keep that new leg, that new stitch of yarn on the right needle tip. Because let me undo what I've done here. If I go in under that leg and I wrap the yarn, if I don't hold that yarn tight, it's going to pop right off the needle tip, and then I won't have done anything. So you want to carry that new loop of yarn. You want to grab that sheep and take it back under the fence, and then off it comes. In under the fence, grab the sheep, out of the fence, and off we leap. Can you hear my neighbors? They have a German Shepherd who really likes to bark. And I have been trying to record this video for at least an hour, and that has been one happy barking dog outside. So because he's an awfully handsome, very, is he a nice dog? I don't know. He's a big dog. I'm fond of big dogs, but I'm not sure I would really want to get all that close to that big dog, close enough to find out whether or not he's a nice dog. But my neighbors are nice, so we're just going to ignore any dog barking that we hear in this video. Okay, Gerald? In under the fence, grab the sheep, out of the fence, and off we leap. Okay, I'm on the very last one. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch things up. I'm going to change this one to a knit stitch just for fun. So I'm going to bring my yarn to the back of the right hand needle tip, and now I'm ready to knit. So I'm going to go to the left, and in I go, and I'm going to complete my last stitch as a knit stitch. Not for any particular reason, just to practice going from back to front. So now you can see what I have on my needle. I have 4 knit stitches, I have 5 purl stitches, and I have 1 knit stitch at the end. Now, I wanted to answer a question that I had that I received on the knit stitch video, and it was from, I believe your name is pronounced Mara. And she asked me a great question. And in fact, it was really funny because when she asked me that question, I had to really think about it because I didn't realize I'd been doing that. So her question was, when she noticed that when I push, so let me get a stitch ready here. When I push the knit stitch off the left hand needle tip, she noticed that I help it off with my left finger, my left index finger. That I push the yarn. See that? That motion right there. That I push the right needle tip backwards and off the needle. And I never even noticed that I do that. It's a complete habit. So I played around with it for a little while to figure out why it is that I do that, because as habits form, you don't always notice that you're doing them. And I think that why I do that is to help make sure in my mind that that yarn isn't going to pop off those needle tips before I'm ready for the stitch to happen. So as I make the stitch, I push the needle back with my fingertip, but I keep it there until I've popped it through and it's safe. And then I take it off. Does that make sense? The funny thing about doing things that are using a repetitive motion, you will develop your own habits. Now, she wondered, whether that was something that we really should be doing, because shouldn't we be protecting our fingertips? And, these are not like cross-stitch needles. They're not that sharp. And I am not pushing it hard enough. Like you can see, it is making a slight indent in my finger, but not enough to hurt, not enough that I even noticed I was doing it. And I have some really super sharp sock needles that I use, and I make the same motion. So I'm not all that worried about it. It's a habit of mine. You don't have to do it that way. There are lots of other things that you're going to notice that people do differently. If you watch other people doing, knitting tutorials who are, showing how they tension their yarn, or they won't even mention anything. They'll just do it. They'll do the motion and then they'll do the stitch. I've noticed with English style, a lot of people don't wrap the yarn around the pinky. They do it a different way, or they double loop around the index finger. That's a very common way of tensioning that I've seen. But to me, that feels too tight. It's probably why my tension as a knitter is quite loose, and I normally have to go down a few needle sizes. So that's actually really an interesting thing to think about, how you tension your yarn. And does it feel more secure when you do it that way? Or maybe you want to hold it in your hands a little bit differently. For me, that's a very comforting motion, and it's one that I just naturally make and the one that I naturally gravitate to. However, if teaching piano and flute for too many years to count or admit to has taught me one thing, it's taught me that humans are pretty amazing creatures in how we learn, and that everyone learns differently. So I can have a child who is an audio learner or a visual learner, and I have to make sure that I tailor my teaching to how they learn. So there may be, you know, for every comment that I've had for someone saying, I got it, I did it, you may have, you know, 10 other people out there who didn't get it and who feel frustrated by what they see and what they can't do. And it's not because they're bad or they don't know how to learn or they can't knit. It's simply that they're missing a piece of the puzzle. So, you know, there are two main ways to learn how to knit. One of them is holding the yarn in the right. We've talked about this. The other one is holding the yarn in the left, the Continental style. One of my very best friends, Adrian, is a Continental knitter. So it only makes sense for me to offer a couple more videos showing how Adrian knits. So just in case there are those of you out there who are really struggling with the right hand holding of the yarn, the right hand tensioning of the yarn, Adrian was a crocheter. She is a right-handed, her dominant hand is the right, but she holds her yarn in the left. And knits Continental style. She also purls Continental style, and I've had, I know Kay's cross stitch. I believe you are a Continental knitter and you were wondering about learning how to purl or improving your purling as a Continental knitter. I can tell you this, it is the one thing that Adrian complains about the most, but don't let that discourage you. Just remember that, you know, we're all learning. Mistakes are how we learn. So look for those Continental knitting videos coming towards the end of next week. Adrian's been sick the last few days, and so we didn't get to record our Fiber Friends podcast on Friday. So when she's feeling better, I'm going to track her down and get her to show us and show me how she knits the Continental style, because it's definitely something that I would like to add to my toolbox. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go across the board and I'm going to purl this whole row of stitches. So what I did just when we were talking, I went and I knit the whole thing. So you can see I have a whole row of, this is the back side of the knit stitch that I just did on the row previously. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run along and I'm going to purl the whole row. So when we start a purl row, you need to make sure that your yarn is in the front. So here's my working yarn, and here's my tail that is coming from the ball, and I need to make sure that my needle tip is on the right side of that working yarn. So you can see, here's my needle, here's the working yarn. Okay, if your needle is on this side of the yarn, well, you can still make your first stitch, but it's going to look like this, which is fine. Just pick it up and off you go. But you can see the yarn is at the front of the working of the row that I'm about to work. So needle tip in from the right to the left, wrap it around, off we go. So let's go across our whole row with the purl stitch. Almost there. You'll notice that instead of using my index finger when I purl, I'm using my thumb, which I never noticed I was doing before I was asked that question. Fascinating stuff, you guys. Off it comes, last stitch. There we go. That dog's name is Moby, so you know who's barking in the background. Now, do you see the back? Here's the back of my work. I now have 2 rows at the back of bumps. And down here you can sort of see what mess I had going on before, where I did that row of miscellaneous stitches in a row. But when I turn it around, here's what happens. It's flat. So this is what we were talking about before. When we have one side of the fabric that is completely flat, that's called stockinette. And here is a garter ridge when I knit every row. And here I have a row of knit and a row of purl, and it creates that nice flat surface. That's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. It is Sunday, February 17th, I think, 2018. Happy knitting, and I'll see you tomorrow.